This. My name is James Garofalo. Can everybody in the back hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Um, if this isn't your first session, I assume for most of you, it's not. I'm going to do a quick shout out to our sponsors. I'm going to read a little thing here. Our sponsors, none of this would have been possible. So, with that said, thank you for joining us at the 11th Annual Denver Startup Week. Thank you for our title sponsors, Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. This session is part of the Designer Track, sponsored by the Public Works, one of 8 programming tracks aimed at supporting the entire entrepreneurial team. By attending this session, you are, of course, agreeing to follow our code of conduct, as well as to being photographed and recorded. And if you love what we do here today, please share your experience online using hashtag DenStartupWeek. Also, we realize that this runs until about 4:30, which for many of you probably means happy hour. And so, in a shameless attempt to retain you here, we're going to be raffling off $200 cash giveaway at the end of this if you stick around. Compliments of Art KG. And so how it's going to work, there's one requirement, and it's that you follow us on our social media. And so we're going to operate on good faith. Pull out your devices, please. Whatever you got, take a few minutes. Follow us on any of those links, and then Kelsey's going to be walking around with a ticket. Hang on to it, and like I said, at the end of this, we're going to go ahead and raffle that off. So take a couple of seconds here, and I'll be right back. Yeah, just one will work. One or all. And if you get there, if you get there and you see that there's not a whole lot going on, don't be disappointed. We're launching in about 4 weeks, and there's plenty of really exciting and really cool content coming. Yeah, just hang on to both of them because we're going to recollect them in a little bit. Thank you. If this starts to throw some at me. Hold down with this. Thank you so much. Are we good? Everybody got a ticket? 2 tickets? Okay, cool. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I have another pleasant surprise. So, I want to really just share a story with you all today. And I want to start with this. I actually have another, and it's another giveaway. I have a $100 Amazon gift card if somebody in this room can tell me the differences between these 2 pictures. Now, before you shout out any guesses, and I pace, by the way. I used to teach, and my students told me it was like watching a metronome, so bear with me, and I hope that's not too much of a pain in the ass for this guy. So I'm not necessarily referring to the obvious wardrobe changes, all right? And I ask that you not judge too harshly on the changes that come with the natural aging process, all right? Let's be kind. The photo on the left was taken about 7 years before the one on the right. But if you look carefully, there is something that is slightly more subtle. And if you can identify it, the card is yours. Just shout it out. I got to hear it. Okay, I heard a smile over here. I'm sorry. I heard a couple. Yeah? I'm gonna let Kelsey be the judge, and I'm sorry if you want to fight her for it. So pass it out to whoever you heard. So what was, and was it you? Can I ask your name? Troy? Troy, thank you so much. Troy's spot on. So it's actually the smile. Take a look at the smile. The photo on the left, you'll see this kind of snarky sideways grin thing going on. To me, it's kind of disingenuous. And when you compare it to the one on the right, you'll see the one on the right is a little more full. It's a little more authentic. To me, it comes off just being more genuine. And of course, you can see my teeth. Now, before we move on, I want to show you one more photo here. And in fact, I want to show you about 272 more photos. I was expecting a larger screen, so I know some of you in the back can't see it, so I apologize. But what you're looking at here is a collage of selfies spanning over a 7-year time period between 2014 and 2021. For some inexplicable reason that I'm really not proud to admit to, between 2014 and 2021, I would sporadically and very spontaneously take selfies of myself while working at my computer desk. This wasn't something routine. This wasn't something recurring. In fact, I had no idea what I was even going to do with these. And this was up until about January of 2021. I learned about NFTs. Now, this is not a presentation on NFTs. This is not a presentation on cryptocurrency. In fact, you don't even need to really know anything about those things, other than the fact, if you don't already know, an NFT, of course, stands for a non-fungible token. And despite usages that I'm sure stem far past my comprehension of what the hell they're used for, I was introduced to them as being pieces of digital art. And as an artist, I was really drawn to that. I thought that was really cool. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to put these photos into this NFT and be done with it. And so one night I'm sitting up, I'm arranging these photos, and basically what you're looking at here is that top left photo is the very first one I took in 2014, and then they run in chronological order from left to right, row after row after row. And so one night I'm sitting up arranging these photos, and something catches my eye, and it's precisely what Troy just identified in the last photo. And I realized that during the first several years of these photos, it is virtually impossible to find one where I'm smiling with my teeth. And as the years go on, it's the total opposite. I realize that it becomes virtually impossible to find a photo where I'm not smiling with my teeth. And so initially, I kind of just chalked this up to being a coincidence. But the more I thought on it, the more I added pictures, the more I realized it was just too perfect. Something was going on in there. And then something kind of dawned up my memory, and it's nothing, admittedly, it's nothing terribly revelational, but I remembered I ended up getting braces during that 7-year time period. For those of you in this room that know me best, probably know that I come from a fairly lower class upbringing. I was the youngest of 3 siblings. My dad worked a dead-end job at a nursing home, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so as I entered my early 20s, I became so subconsciously insecure about my smile that I ultimately stopped doing it. And it wasn't until I worked on this NFT that I realized, holy shit, right? There's something going on here. And so not only did this project serve as the inspiration behind my current company, which is Art KG, which I'm co-founding with my wife and hairstylist, Kelsey, which is a high-end, sort of all-natural professional hair product company. But all of which, and really the basis of our company is built on something we call radical self-acceptance, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Our mission is really to empower self-confidence and provide products to people who can establish that sense of self-confidence. And so that was the first thing it did. The second thing it did is it really got me wondering about ways in which art and design were having a subconscious impact on me. It made me wonder if I had this outcome, this emotional outcome to this NFT simply because I was the one featured in it, or if there was something else going on, and there were other pieces of art and other designs that I was interacting with every single day that were having the same impact on me. And so all the while this is going on, I'm reading this book. Just by a show of hands, has any of you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning? Okay, so a couple of you. If you haven't read it, it's certainly worth a read. It basically follows the author's experience in a World War II Nazi concentration camp where despite horrendous circumstances, he's able to find meaning to his life. And I can't really tell you why I was reading this at the time. I could tell you I spent most of my 20s in the behavioral health industry. In 2018, I founded an outpatient mental health clinic in Colorado Springs called Viewpoint Psychotherapy Services. I founded it with one other therapist, and it started out as a small practice, and over the course of 2 very short, or I could say very fast years, I grew to a full-service outpatient clinic that served thousands of patients across the state of Colorado. And no more than 24 months later, we were acquired by what's now a national and publicly traded company with about 600 locations across the US. And so I'm reading this book, and one of the, I don't want to speak for like all entrepreneurs, but like for me, when I transitioned out of that, I stayed on with the company for about a year and a half, but I kind of like felt a calling in my heart to pursue something else. I knew I didn't want to stay there indefinitely. And so maybe that's why I picked up this book. Nonetheless, one of the quotes that's accredited to the author is this. He says, "In his creative work, the artist is dependent on the sources and resources deriving from the spiritual unconscious." And so again, maybe one of those perfect coincidence things, but I had just finished this NFT, the wheels were already sort of turning, and then I stumbled on this quote, and I'm like, okay, now I have to pursue it. And so I went back as far as I could to the very first impactful art piece that I could remember, and the very first place I landed was this. So what you're seeing here is what's supposed to be a Christmas tree ornament of a snowman that I made in the 2nd grade. It was the day before we were going out on holiday break, and like many kids, we were doing the arts and crafts thing to take home to our loved ones. And minutes before we were being released, I'm standing in line waiting for my mother to come pick me up. And I'll never forget, my teacher came up to me, and her name was Miss Rose. And she said, "James, you really should have used snowballs instead of a triangle. It would have made your snowman much more realistic." And at the tender age of 7, I didn't think anything of it. I was in trouble all the time anyway, so I just assumed I did some sort of wrongdoing. But the more I aged and the more I reflected back on that, the more I realized, the more it made me wonder why this teacher, who was entrusted with really influencing the young and imaginative minds of 8-year-olds, why she was pushing this like agenda of more realistic art than more creative and more innovative art, at least by an 8-year-old's perspective. And so I thought on it, I kept thinking on it, and I didn't have to think very long or for very hard, because no more than a year later, I'm in 3rd grade now, and this is all in retrospect, of course, but I realized that everything around me, the world that existed around me, was very predetermined. This real world that Miss Rose had kind of laid the foundation for me and my peers was one that had predated me for centuries, if not more. Now, this photo here on the left is just a year later in the 3rd grade. And I do want to apologize. That's a Pittsburgh Steelers jersey I'm wearing. I'm from Pennsylvania. I think it's a Greg Lloyd jersey from the 90s. So don't walk out yet. There's still $200 on the line. And anyway, so I'm in 3rd grade now, and I realize, like, I'm learning basic shapes, and I'm learning basic colors. And this isn't a story I don't think that's exclusive to me. I think it probably, in fact, impacts all of us. It's, everything that I was consuming on a day-to-day basis was already in this real world. And all the while this is going on, I'm also getting the early introduction to obedience. I'm now learning how to raise my hand in class, how to stand in line, how to ask permission to use the restroom. I don't want to go on off a rant here, but this was back in the 90s when we had those little, did anybody have those little carpet squares that used to take naps on? Certainly we weren't still napping on them in 3rd grade, but every so often we'd pull them out of some musty closet. They always smelled like shit, excuse my language. And we would sit on them, for story time. And I remember my mother telling the teacher one day, she said, I don't know how you get James to sit on that carpet square for more than 5 minutes. I can't get him to sit in one room for more than 5 minutes at home. And what I realized was that was what was going on around me. That was the world around me. That's what I was seeing my peers do. And so naturally it was having that impact on me. And so what I ultimately realized was that after 18 years, this real world that Miss Rose had laid the foundation for followed me all the way up through my adulthood. This photo here now is 6 weeks after graduating high school. That's a picture of me swearing into the military. I did 4 years active duty Army, and I could probably stand right here and talk to you for the next 4 hours about the degree of conformity and uniformity that, of course, exists in the military, as you might imagine. And I did 4 years. I got out. I did the college thing and the grad school thing, and it was just like the cycle was repeating. Once again, there I was in a room, in a crowd, looking up at this speaker, almost exactly like what's going on right now, right? We're in a space with 4 walls, a ceiling, and some sort of attempt to extract education or inspiration or entertainment, just on a slightly more complex level than like basic shapes. And after a quarter century, I arrived at one very concrete landing, and it was this right here on the left picture. So this photo here on the left is a picture of my current residence in Colorado Springs, which is where I live. Admittedly, I think depending on where you are in time and space and geographical location, it could probably either be seen as a fortress or a dump. But what's more funny about this is directly across from my house is this house on the right. And directly next to that one is another house that looks exactly like that one. And next to that one is another one, and so on. And so what I realize now, after 25 years of where I was at when we moved in here, I realized I was part of this homogeneous ecosystem that was created of the same designs and the same infrastructures and the same colors and the same real world that Miss Rose had pushed. And it wasn't just the infrastructures, it wasn't just the designs, it was also the behaviors. Now this photo here, these two on the left are obviously stock images. I didn't want to look like a creeper taking pictures of my neighbors, one of which is in the audience here today. I assure you it's not about you. Anyways, so it wasn't just the infrastructures that were all very homogeneous, it was the behaviors. Every single morning, when I'm either coming back from the gym or like booting up my computer to start the day or whatever, I look at my window and I see some version of this. I see people dressed in their professional attire going off to do the 9-to-5 thing. I see families, more often than not in my community, that sort of stereotypical nuclear family, engaging in these existential yet very recreationally homogenous behaviors of riding bikes, mowing the lawns, and doing all that sort of stuff that we're expected to do after living, the life of the Miss Roses. This photo here on the right actually is a park about a quarter mile from my house, which is really just speaks to me anyways, it just speaks to the limitations that we place on where and when we can have imaginative play and where and when we can, get a little more creative and outside of that everyday real world. And sadly, anywhere I went in the world seemed to have some version of this. I'll back up and say I've been very fortunate. At this point, I've spent probably a collective 2 years of my life living and working in different countries around the world. And this is just a small snapshot of some of those countries. But what's funny about these pictures is that they're all the residences and they're all the dwellings and some of the institutions and schools of those countries. And so it seemed like it didn't matter whether I was on some oceanside Mediterranean villa that was really lavish and beautiful, or the single-room dirt-floored huts in the slums of Africa or Nepal. Everywhere I went had some version of young minds being conditioned by somebody who was teaching them about this real world and pushing that real world agenda on them. And, in a sense, I don't blame the Miss Roses because it's passed on generation to generation. Let me just ask you all this. Did anybody have any young kids during the COVID lockdown in here? Like 5th grade and a couple of you? A few of you. So my son was in 1st grade when the COVID lockdown happened. And I'll just be honest, like every single morning was I don't know what your experiences were like. Every single morning was a chaotic shit show of trying to figure out lesson plans, connecting the calls that would never be connected. It just never worked. And so, but one consistency in all this is that every 3 or 4 weeks, his mother and I would connect to a virtual call with the teacher. And one day we're sitting down at the table, and my son's pulling out materials from his notebook, and he gets to this, which I really loved, which was supposed to be a picture of his mother. And he holds it up to the camera, and before anybody could say anything, the teacher said, yeah, and we're still really trying to stay inside the lines. And it was like total flashback to the snowman, of course. And this time as a father, it was like I was somewhat guilty because, no more than an hour before that phone call, my son and I are outside on the deck, and of course all the free time COVID brought, and we're looking up at the clouds, and what does like every adult do when they engage in that exercise with kids? It's like, oh, there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and there's a smiley face. And so it's like our brains are hardwired to extract that conditioning that we were so early exposed to and resort to very familiar labels and very familiar categories. Much different than if you were to look at that squiggly line there that I drew just for the sake of the presentation, and try to identify that, right? If I asked you to look at that and tell me what that is, more than likely, like, you'd probably say, well, it looks kind of like some sort of boot, or, I think I see a number 2 written at the top, right? And so again, we would be defaulting to the world around us, that real world. And this mentality, this way of living gets trickled on to generation, now reflected by, my son's toys there. Same colors, same shapes. And it's not just something that's experienced visually, it's something that's experienced with all of our senses, right? The more time we spend in that world, the more time we limit ourselves, or our window to experience new textures, to experience new shapes, new colors, new sounds, really starts to dwindle. And so, when I go back to Frankl's quote, I don't think he's wrong. In fact, this might piss some of you off, but I'd go as far as to say that we've almost become victims of this unconscious, right? When we leave here today, we're going to go out in the streets, and we've been up here all week, and I love Denver. I love the buildings. They're just awe-inspiring. And I think as a species, we love to pat ourselves on the back and say, wow, these are, just exceptionally innovative infrastructures and creations that were totally constructed out of our imagination. But it makes me wonder if we've built those things not out of a strong sense of imagination, but much more something that's much more connected to our nervous system, something that's much more connected to our sense of sustainability and our need for survival. And I would say we really don't have to look much further past like the animal kingdom, right? Everything you're looking at here is the same infrastructures, the same homes and ecosystems, but created by animals. We have a bear's den, bird's nest, wasp nest. I think that's a beaver dam. These are all the same structures that I would argue were not built or established out of the animal's sense of imagination, but instead something that's more connected, again, to more primal and innate parts of who we are. Even that photo down there in the right, I have a very fat and lazy English bulldog who we love because of it. And but even he knows that during the summer months, when it gets hot, if he sits on the AC vent, like, he stays cool. And so all summer long, I'm trailing around the house, picking up blankets and little toys and his own little hut that he built around there. And so again, it makes me wonder how, how we've fallen into this sort of impact of homogenous thinking. So at this point, we're like, I don't know how long, 20 minutes in, and you're probably like, what the hell are we doing here? It's just the most cynical message. And I assure you, this is where we pivot now, because there is a way to balance that, right? I don't think we're all just robots floating through life. Now, I've been told this slide is somewhat verbose by more than one person, so try to stay with me here. Normally, when I talk about creating balance between that real world and creating an optimized version of our art, an optimized version of our designs, the first thing I like to do is encourage people to step outside their comfort zone, step outside and explore the unknown, spend time in discovery. Normally, when I ask people about this, they when we go down the road of talking about inspiration going into those designs, inspiration going into that art, usually I always hear things like, I go for hikes in the mountains, and I'm falling in love with so-and-so, and it's just absolutely, I see the world in a different lens now. And those things are undoubtedly very much part of the human condition and all very joyous. But if you limit yourselves only to those joyous moments, you do away with an aspect of inspiration that you probably never realized existed. And the example I want to draw on is is this painting here. Just by a show of hands, how many people have seen Edvard Munch's The Scream, right? Probably every hand goes up. You know, whether you like it or hate it, it's one of the most famous, paintings in the world. We learn about it in grade school. We study it in higher ed. It's featured in pop culture. But what's interesting, and I'm by no stretch of the imagination like an art history major, but I do know what little time I spent looking into this piece was that it was inspired by anything but a joyous experience. In fact, the artist talks about this walk along the fence line, the world transforming into this like corrosive, like angst, space in which he felt this eternal scream. And yet he was able to draw, and just to back up, I feel like in today's world, you could probably speculate on what that is. To me, it sounds like a modern day panic attack, which is very similar, having spent some time in that field. But that's just speculative. The reality is, though, he was able to take something that was profoundly, unpleasant and turn it into something that, influenced many to come. And so when we look at things like poetry and painting and sculpting and all these modern day art forms, these are really just the vehicles that transcend us from the unconscious to the conscious. They take the feelings that arise with the unconscious and the inspiration that comes with those, and now through something intentional and tangible, we create something that we can consume, something that we can experience, and something that if it's a great exhibit or whatever the case may be, we can interact with on more than one basis. All right, how are we doing? I got like 2 more slides here. I said at the beginning of this, I wanted to touch on radical self-acceptance. And the reason I want to close on this is because I think anytime you embark upon disrupting an industry or disrupting a new design or disrupting the status quo in any way, I think it's good to have, you're always going to have those Miss Roses. You're always going to have people that push back, at least from my experience. This is just drawing on my experiences. And so I think when those moments happen, if and when they happen, I think it's good to equip yourself with some tools going into that. Now, before we go into radical self-acceptance, I'm sure everybody in here has heard of self-acceptance, right? For me, I think I was like, I don't know, in like middle school, going through puberty, and all of our parents and teachers wanted to make sure we weren't wildly uncomfortable in our own skin during a time that could be kind of challenging for many people. And so we were taught to love ourselves and to practice self-acceptance. And I think that's a very positive message. I think it's great. But again, drawing on my own, really cynical outlook here, I guess. Self-acceptance for itself is for me, it's always been limited to our environment. And I want to give some examples. Think about any job you've ever applied to in your life, whether it was a dishwashing job you had when you were 14 or a paper route, to some executive level position you might be in now. What's usually the first thing that you do? You see a job description and a job title. And so right out the gate, before even going into this thing, you're already told what you're going to be. Your identity is already being established by what you're going to be and what you're going to be doing during that time frame. And then what happens when you accept that job? There's normally a job training. You do, it could be 2 hours, it could be 2 months. But during that job training, you learn the company's policies and procedures, or the company's code of ethics, the company's operating manual. And you're probably like, well, yeah, that's how it works. And you're right, that is how it works. But what happens when your sense of self and the things you want to achieve and the designs that you want to bring into the world start to conflict with that environment? That's where radical self-acceptance comes into place. Radical self-acceptance is not only having the intuition and the self-awareness and the mindfulness to recognize when that's happening, but then it's having the courage and the fortitude and the integrity to change it. I think to my time in the military, and like many of us, there was a degree of agency there. I was able to pick what job I wanted to do going in. As I established rank, I was able to make day-to-day decisions for myself. But what if I felt compelled to express myself in a way that was going to, impede that environment? What if I wanted to paint my nails or color my hair or express my identity in any other way? Not only would it have been frowned upon, but it probably would have resulted in very severe, consequences for the rest of my professional career. And sports teams too. I mean, not to bash sports because like there's so much that comes from. This is more of just a reference and example, but and a very extreme one at that. But if to use a football reference, like if I'm a linebacker and I show up on game night in shorts and a t-shirt, and I tell coach I want to be quarterback for the night, it probably wouldn't go over so well. And that's because now how I want to be, how I want to express myself, the things I think I'm capable of doing are now conflicting with that immediate environment. And so when you look at radical self-acceptance on a spectrum, we have this external world that I think we're all in right now. We have this reality that, and usually it involves some degree of conformity. We might call it a collective consciousness, to use a sociological term by Durkheim or some other shit that I forgot from grad school. And normally, if we pursued things that we are passionate about and things that we're really strong at doing, that the barrier between who we are and that real world normally isn't, it's normally not too far. You might say, well, yeah, I have to get a haircut, but I get so many days off from work. Or I have to wear this attire to work, but I get paid this much. But if and when you do find yourself on the other side of the spectrum, where who you are and the things you want to do in life are conflicting with that environment, that's where the practice of radical self-acceptance comes into place. So with that said, I would say my closing remarks here before we get Vince up here are, they're not really remarks. It's more of a challenge for all of you. I would say don't just live a life handed to you by the Miss Roses. Don't just wander throughout the 9 to 5, living in a world that's predated you for years. Aim to disrupt, create things, go against the grain, swim against the current. And above all, love yourselves and love each other. Thank you so much. Do I introduce you? Everybody, welcome Vince Kadlebeck, co-founder and former CEO of Meow Wolf.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. James, thanks for the invitation. I have kind of a special relationship with Denver Startup Week. It was the first time I ever had a chance to speak on stage, was at Denver Startup Week in 2016. I was invited up here, and Castle Circe, I don't know if anybody knows her, but invited me up here, and it was a pretty transformative time for me. And that was around the time that Meow Wolf opened our project in Santa Fe. So I've been quite obsessed with the imagination my whole life. And I think back to when I was 5 years old and I went to Disneyland and rode Pirates of the Caribbean for the first time as one of the earliest memories of kind of being obsessed with the imagination. I knew that the space that I was in Pirates of the Caribbean was not real, but then at the same time I was there, and so it was real. And I wanted to live in that space. I wanted to jump off the boat and swim to the island and just live inside of Pirates of the Caribbean for the rest of my life if I could. And I grew more fascinated with it in my early 20s. I'd be staying up late listening to Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. I don't know if y'all know that show. It's a radio show that would come on late at night. And my favorite guest was Terrence McKenna, who spoke of the imagination as not this little side story or byproduct of human consciousness or this little subplot of human existence, but actually the imagination as the entirety of the world that we live in. And so Meow Wolf ultimately, for me, I've just been fascinated with what is this weird liminal space where all ideas come from. And so Meow Wolf is kind of a culmination in a lot of ways with that obsession with the imagination. And I just want to go through and kind of tell the story of Meow Wolf. I'm going to move pretty quickly because I also want to leave time for Q&A. Kind of just talk about some of the findings that we've had through the process of opening House of Eternal Return in Santa Fe and Convergence Station here in Denver and Omega Mart in Vegas. We have a mission statement which we've tried our best to unearth, and figure out sort of as archaeologists of sorts of what the hell is this Meow Wolf entity trying to do. And it's inspiring creativity in people's lives so that the imagination may transform our world. And this seems like a very like basic statement, one of those mission statements that sounds good, but there's no real action to it maybe. But if you dig deeper into it, it's actually pretty profound. What the imagination is inside of our human experience, and how it relates to future possibility, and that really, like any problem that has ever been solved, wasn't first the solution wasn't first. The solution is first came from the imagination. That like to move into the future, to solve for any problem, is to first flex the muscle of the imagination. That's where transformation occurs. So of course everybody knows about Convergence Station. If you haven't been, you should go. It's such a weird project. I can't believe that it actually exists. It's a total absurdity, but it's not where the story started. We started as a group in 2008 in Santa Fe as just like a bunch of 20-somethings working like odd jobs in the restaurant industry, hospitality industry. We had no money, and we were just desperate to like find a place to express ourselves, through. Santa Fe is a very creative town, lots of galleries, lots of museums. And we were from there. We were from that city. We were artists from this city that calls itself a very artistic, creative town, and yet we couldn't find anyone who wanted to support us as artists. So we were like, basically just stopped waiting for people to invite us into their space, and we just said, fuck it, we're going to start a space of our own. And so we called ourselves Meow Wolf, chose the name out of two hats. Meow came out of one hat, Wolf came out of the other, and that's how we got our name. And we just started to throw parties and do art and hold lectures and kind of form as just like a social group. We would build with materials that we pulled out of dumpsters because we had no money. And we would build, essentially we were building forts. We were just like big kids just wanting to build forts. And we would invite people into these spaces to like experience our immersive installations. And they would crawl around on floors that were really disgusting and they probably shouldn't have been crawling around on. But this was kind of the early phase of us figuring out what it was that we liked to do. And we didn't know why it resonated with us or why it was powerful, but this was kind of our collective expression. And we did that for like 7 years. And what sort of was like a passion project for a bunch of 20-somethings, 7 years later, it was like an obligation for now a bunch of 30-somethings who were like, what are we doing with our life? We're still very broke, and we spend all of our time, our extra time and extra money, like building these weird exhibits, and maybe I want to start a family, maybe I should go back to college. But I was convinced that if we could find like the right building and the right strategy and the right business plan, that like we could really do something special. So found this old bowling alley in Santa Fe. This is where the House of Eternal Return is, our exhibition in Santa Fe. And I was walking through it with a real estate agent, and I told him, I was like, dude, if we land this spot, then anything is going to be possible. Like, we can build something crazy inside of this building. And so the real estate agent's like, all right, how much money do you have to put down on the down payment? I was like, dude, I don't have any money. I owe my parents like $3,000. That's how much money I have. And he said, okay, well, how much money does Meow Wolf have? As if we were like a real business. And I was like, we also, as a group, have no money. So he's like, all right, well, do you know anyone? He wasn't willing to give up, which I love him forever for that. But he said, who do you know who might have the money to buy this building? And I said, well, I know this guy. I know the author of Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin, who just happens to live in Santa Fe, and he hired me as a $15 an hour marketing person for a movie theater that he owns in Santa Fe. And so I emailed George, and I said, you don't know me very well, but there's a bowling alley. Would you be interested in buying it? And if you did, we will do something super cool inside of it. And so, yeah, basically, long story short, like 6 months after I emailed him, George R. R. Martin became our landlord. at this building, and it was like post Red Wedding, like right after Red Wedding, like season 4. So I was also very nervous about my relationship with George, just knowing how he likes to deal with like main characters. Um, but then fast forward another year after that, after signing the lease, and we opened our first permanent exhibition in Santa Fe called the House of Eternal Return. And this project, how many people have been to the project in Santa Fe? A few? Okay, so there'll be some spoilers here for others. When you walk into the House of Eternal Return, you buy a ticket, and you are first immediately just like placed into this front lawn of this 2-story Victorian house. And from this point forward, you have total agency to go any direction that you want to go. Same as like Convergence Station. You can go to the side yard. You can, just hang out on the front porch. Most people decide to walk through the front door and like explore this house. And it's a house that a family lives in, or lived in, I should say. And you can go through all of their belongings, look at all of their photos, all of their home movies, go through their journals, and kind of just explore this house that they live in. And you'll see some like signs that something has happened and the family is not present, like something's happened to the family. And then you get to the kitchen and walk up to the refrigerator and open the fridge, and instead of there being food in the fridge, it's like a long lit hallway into who knows where. Or you might go to the dryer and realize that it's a tube slide into the unknown. And I oftentimes say that, like, if there's anything that we learned at Meow Wolf, it's that humans desperately want to walk through their household appliances because it's like a deep-seated need or something. It's like deep in us to want to do that because people love it. It's like crazy how much people are just like, yes, I get to walk through a fridge. And I say it as a joke, but it's also there's also kind of a truth to it, which is similar to what James was talking about in his presentation, which is like we grow up in these copy-pasted households with like the same appliances, and like as a kid, you're like, is this it? Like this is life? This is reality? Isn't there something more like beyond the walls, beyond the metaphorical and actual walls of our existence? And then once you go through the portals, you end up in this crazy multi-level, multimedia, immersive art installation that spans like 15,000 square feet and is, awesome sound, awesome lighting, awesome sculpture, built by like 130 of the most brilliant people in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we worked on this for like 16 months, morning to night, every day to try to get this thing open. Scrounged up $2.5 million to make this thing go, and learned about business and learned about employing people and raising capital, and a wild ride. And we really, we had no idea how this project was going to go. Like at the time, immersive installation was like a known thing in the art world, like Terrell, Kasama, TeamLab. But we were trying to open this up for like the general public. Like we needed a lot of people to come to this in order to enjoy it. And we didn't know if people would get it or if they would think it was just weird and dumb. And we had anticipated 100,000 people a year coming through the doors in Santa Fe. And the first year we saw 500,000 visitors. And it became the most popular tourist attraction in the entire state of New Mexico. And it was people of all ages, all backgrounds, like didn't matter your belief system, didn't matter your education level, didn't matter your age. People who had never stepped foot in a gallery before or a museum because they didn't really feel welcome in the world of art, in the traditional world of art. And I realized in this moment that we think that art is for a certain type of person, certain personality type, and that creativity is, it's for some people but not for everyone. But this proved to me that everyone wants to engage with the imagination. Everybody wants to have a creative experience. Everybody wants to engage with art. You know, it's the framework, the industry, the definitions of art that have kept people from feeling welcomed or feeling like they belong in that conversation. But when you change the context, it's a line out the door with people who want to have a creative experience. I mean, we had people driving from Kansas who definitely did not vote for the president I voted for, like wanting to walk through a weird psychedelic art installation in Santa Fe, New Mexico, you know? And we're getting amazing reviews, you know? 4-star, 5-star reviews, it's totally worth the price of admission, you gotta go, you gotta check it out. But there are some reviews that really took us by surprise. Like this one from Hannah that says, I went a few years ago and it's life-changing. And we were getting like handwritten notes and emails and people telling us like, yeah, like going to Meow Wolf is life-changing. And I was CEO at the time during this period, and I like had to look into this. I had to be like, what is life-changing about this? Because like we know we created something cool, we know we created something beautiful, something different, but like life-changing. What's going on there? And so I read this book called The Experience Economy by Pine and Gilmore. And this was written in the early 90s. Everybody should check it out. It's really quite ahead of its time in its thinking. And it predicted the economy that we're in now and predicted it 20 years ago. Basically said that like the economy has evolved over time from first the commodity, then to the good, then to service, and then ultimately to the experience. And they were saying this at a time in the 90s when we were kind of like squarely in the service economy. And they were saying like, just wait, the experience economy is on its way. And that was before even social media. Like now the experience economy is obvious because you want to do cool experiences and take pictures of them and then, you know, brag about it on social media. And kind of the way you can look at it is like, you know, from the coffee bean to the ground and packaged coffee bean to then the brewed and served coffee bean and then ultimately to the coffee shop, which is like the experience. But it still didn't quite get to this, you know, and so I read the book. And I ended up reaching out to Joseph Pine, the author, and saying like, "Hey, can we talk about the experience economy? I want to get a sense as to like where there's something deeper, because I feel like there's something deeper than just an experience happening at Meow Wolf." And he's like, "Well, yeah, you didn't read the latest edition of the book. The latest edition of the book has another tier above experience, which is transformation. So like that beyond the experience economy will be the transformation economy." And they just amended the book like 6 or 7 years ago to add transformation as a higher tier. So that made sense to me. I was like, all right. So I went back to the fridge moment. And I was like, I think, you know, there's so many Instagram posts and hoopla and TikTok videos about the fridge. I was like, okay, something special is happening here. And I thought about it. And it's like when you're in the kitchen, you're in a totally familiar place. Like it's a framework, a context that you're familiar with. It's the known world. And then we get to the fridge and you open the fridge, you realize that this is gonna lead you out of the known world and into the unknown. And I think something really special happens for people in this moment, where if the fridge can be more than what the fridge is supposed to be, then maybe the world can be more than what the world is supposed to be. And then more importantly, if the world can be more than what the world is supposed to be, then maybe I can be more than what I'm supposed to be. And so it's like this becomes an invitation for individuals to step out of who they have been, and they get to then, after they walk through this portal, they get to be whoever the fuck they want to be, which they should anyway, but you know, the way that our brains are created, it's hard to do that, and I'll get more into that. The whole like transformational process begins with agency. You need to provide folks with agency so that they can make their own choice to step through the fridge, you know, whatever we're talking about, whatever metaphor we're talking about, but they need to have the choice to make that step through into the unknown. And this is the same with like anyone who's familiar with like psychedelic therapy. You know, it doesn't work if you're like, hey, you got to do shit ton of mushrooms, and it's like somebody has to want to do it themselves. Like they have to want to like make that choice in order for the transformation to even work. And from agency, there's an empowerment, and from the empowerment, there's exploration, and from exploration, there's discovery. It's really simple. Like people have the choice to then explore, and then through the exploration, they discover. And this is what happens inside of a Meow Wolf space. And this seems really basic, it seems really simple, yet the process of exploration and discovery is incredibly rare in our lives, weirdly. And the reason is because exploration and discovery can only exist within the context of the unknown. If you're in a known environment, then exploration and discovery doesn't happen because you already know it. So there's nothing to explore, there's nothing to discover. So in order to have like really high frequency moments of exploration and discovery, it needs to be as unknown of environment as possible. And we're in a really interesting time right now because on our phones, we get to explore and discover all the time. Like, dozens of times every hour, we are exploring and discovering things, whether it's on your Twitter feed or your TikTok or your Instagram. You are scrolling through to try to find things that you've never seen before. And if you see something that you've seen before, you probably just scroll right past it. And so it's like we're training ourselves on a Pavlovian level via our phone to constantly be seekers of new content, constantly be seekers of something we've never seen before that's outside of the realm of the known. But then the moment we put our phones in our pocket and we go out into the real world, it's incredibly boring and predictable and known. Like there's nothing to explore and discover inside of this environment. Like there's a Starbucks and there's a Dickies and there's gonna probably be a Subway around the corner, and so people get mad at like younger generations for always being on their phone, and I'm like, no, like the phone is more interesting. If we want people to be off their phone, then let's build a more interesting world to engage them in, But it's deeper than just the suburban developments, because really the suburban developments are just a byproduct of us as individuals. The greatest apparatus of knownness that we have is called the identity. It tells us who we are and what we like and what we're about and how we talk and how, which way we drive home every day, and basically defines the entire world around us with knownness. And like when you're a kid, you enter into this world fully unknown. Like the world itself is totally unknown, and you as an individual, you haven't built that identity yet, you are also totally unknown. And so there's exploration and discovery like all the time as a kid. And there's byproducts of this exploration and discovery. You could call it spirit. There's curiosity, there's learning, growth, there's play, there's happiness. And then when we get older, we build this casing around us that tells us all the things that we know, and it's impossible for us to operate outside of that context of knowing. And we build that casing of knowing in order to protect ourselves from the risks of the unknown. It's all a big defense mechanism against the potential risks of venturing into the unknown. But ultimately, we end up feeling suffocated. We feel trapped. Life becomes difficult, and we realize that we're our own worst enemy. And I think a lot of adults start to realize this, and they're like, where's the kid in me? Like, where's that spirit that I had when I was a youth? And so that is really like what's leading people to this transformation economy. Because there's a desperate need to try to break out of our known self. And what's interesting, I've been talking to a professor at UNM from the neuroscience department named Vincent Clark, and he's studying the hippocampus and like it's essentially where attention comes from. And we're really good at giving attention to the past. We're really good at giving attention to images of the past or experiences of the past. Like we can close our eyes and we can imagine what it looked like at our elementary school, when we were in 3rd grade. Really vivid. But it's the same area of the brain that can also give attention to the future and hold future visions, future images. We're just really bad at it. Like, you might say like, oh, I have this great idea for this book that I'm going to create, or this great idea for this little short animation that I'm going to create. And then like a week later, you're like, it's gone. No stability, can't hold on to it. And it's because we've been conditioned, thanks to evolution, to be as past-based as possible, because that's how we survived. That's how we protected ourselves against the actual risks, the actual like survival risks that were out there. We're in a really special moment in the human trajectory because so many of those actual risks, we have externalized systems to be able to support us. Like we don't have to worry about growing the crops or harvesting the crops, because that's done for us. We go to the grocery store. That's already like taken care of. Or we don't even have to worry about like remembering how to get home or remembering or trying to like memorize someone's phone number. Like these things aren't necessary for us to have anymore. So it's almost as if we've externalized systems to be able to take on the things that memory is really important for. And it opens us up to the possibility of using that same part of our brain to become future-based beings, to become individuals who are living into the future rather than living based on the knownness of the past. And so this transformation economy, you see it reflected in, now like everybody here is lucky in Denver, I'm lucky in Santa Fe because we have access to nature. Nature is an amazing way to break out of the knownness and into the unknown. There's so many hundreds of millions of people in the United States and around the world who do not have access to nature in the same sort of way. So people are going on retreats to try to break out of their known self. People are taking psychedelics to try to break out of their known self. And thankfully, thanks to UCLA and Johns Hopkins and many other universities, we're finding that psychedelics are a really great way to break out of that default mode of operation and that past-based self in order to heal things like depression and PTSD and anxiety. But I believe that immersive art is also a really impactful way to do this. It literally takes people out of the context of their reality and for even a couple hours, a few hours, lets them exist within a completely foreign context where like it doesn't matter. Like I could sit across, I could sit in Convergence Station across from someone who out in the real world I might argue about politics with, or out in the real world I might not resonate with. But because I'm in Convergence Station and I'm inside of this weird alien world, it doesn't matter who this person voted for president. Like, it doesn't matter what their beliefs are. Like, we are both in this weird alternate reality anyway, and so it kind of opens up our channels to be able to connect outside of our identities. So yeah, I think about the imagination a lot. Like I said, where is this going? This is kind of like stepping back and looking bigger view of like the human trajectory and what the fuck is the imagination. And I kind of came up with this graph. It's an impossible thing to actually graph, but I think it probably looks something like this. Asking yourself how many things have been created from the imagination, and start in 10,000 BC and then work all the way to 2022. And I mean, just look around, like what in this room was not created by the imagination? We right now are surrounded entirely by it. But somewhere around the first industrial revolution, ironically, it starts to go vertical. And I don't think that graph is slowing down anytime soon. Like, we are at a breakneck pace, obsessive pace, to just create stuff, create from the imagination, create from the imagination, create from the imagination. And VR and AR and metaverse and digital fabrication and AI creativity and all of this stuff is going to make this graph continue to go even more severely vertical. And to what end? To what end? Ultimately, I think it's our destiny to live fully in it. Like, we are striving to be in dream all the time. So yeah, I was gonna show pictures of Convergence. How many people have been to Convergence Station? All right, yeah. You guys got to get down to Santa Fe and check out House of Eternal Return. So y'all have seen this. This is the cool exhibit that we created. So yeah, that's my presentation. I'm happy to take Q&A. You can do Q&A? Yeah, so thank you for the time. And I also just want to say to the community of Denver, y'all, like the amount of embracing and support that y'all have shown to Meow Wolf is amazing. We feel like we are part of this community, and that's saying a lot, given that we've only been here for a couple years now. And so, just thank you for your warm hearts and your embracing of what we've done. Thank you.
I don't know if we need to keep everyone here as a hostage for those of you that don't want to be part of the Q&A, so we can do the drawing now. We certainly invite everybody to stick around for the Q&A, but we will do the drawing. So did everybody, one last chance, follow us on social media. If you didn't connect with us, if you didn't get a ticket, raise your hand, and then Kelsey will come around and enter you in here. So you just yeah. She's just collecting like one of them. Yeah.
How you gonna select it? Oh yeah, sure. Thank you.
Like how did they win?
Well, no, like who's doing the selection?
Oh.
Gotta have some sort of creative.
Who's gonna draw it? Is that what you mean?
Gotta do something creative though.
What do you want to do?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I was gonna enter. I almost did. It's like I could use tutor bar.
Think of something.
Yeah.
What do you want to do?
No, I'll just select it. How much time do we have?
It's like 10 after.
It's 10 after?
I think it's like 10 after.
Okay, sweet. That's perfect. That's good. 20 minutes is good. Oh, yeah.
Go for it.
A little bit. I play it a lot, and we do also work in VR. Like we do a lot of stuff in Gravity Sketch, like design. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think there's definitely a future for that. Yeah, I think so. I think there's interest in that from our end. Yeah, for sure. I think it's gonna be there's a huge opportunity. Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right. So we got everybody's in. We got the tickets. Is this on?
It's on, yeah. Was it on for
Is
me?
it?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Oh.
Okay, well, screw that. So what we're gonna do, Vince recommended we do something creative instead of just drawing it. So I mean, just kind of a spontaneous moment. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw it, and then you're gonna catch one. All right. So I'm gonna throw a handful of tickets at you, and the one that you catch.
Oh yeah, you got to put yours in there.
Oh, you got to put one.
One of those in there.
She's gonna be like, surprise, surprise! I drew mine. All right. Are you ready?
You can catch more than one, but then you just have to drop. Two more.
No, we don't want you to just pick one from the bucket. Two more. Okay. All right. Do you want to come a little bit closer? All right. You ready?
Yes.
That one. All right.
All right.
Oh wait, there's one that miraculously caught onto the.
All right. 912-0251. All right. There we go.
Nice. $200.
Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate it. We're happy to stick around if you have questions for Vince or for me, and we'll be here until 4:30.
What time is it?
Around.
Yeah.
Have you considered a subscription model for your spaces?
Yeah. That's a really apropos question. We were just talking about it this week. Like, first, maybe not subscription at first, but like just, the whole point of Meow Wolf is like for us is building community. But what happens is people go to the Meow Wolf and then like that's like a weekend thing and then they're done. And so it's like we want to build more of like a membership loyalty thing, like not to make money at first. I'm sure there will be some sort of value at some point, but it's more so just about connecting people who had a nice time, but we're probably gonna do like a road trip thing, like a Denver, Santa Fe, Vegas type of like multi-ticket. Yeah.
I asked because my boyfriend and I are big puzzle fans, and we still haven't finished Convergence Station. We did Omega Mart in 6.5 hours. We've been twice now. We're like, we
Nice.
have to keep going back, but it's hard to bucket a whole day. Like if we could do it a couple hours at
Yeah.
a time and go back and have almost like a membership, I think that might be more approachable.
That's a good point.
Or into the puzzle.
Yeah, when we first launched in Santa Fe, we had like an annual membership, like an annual pass type thing, that like was like a couple $100. So like if you went 4 times, you pay for it. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that we're wanting to do again. Yeah, thanks.
I was just going to ask why, I've been to the one in New Mexico, Santa Fe many years ago. I've not been to the one here, and I live here. What made you pick Denver?
So growing up in Santa Fe, Denver was always like the cool city that we would come up to for really good concerts. Albuquerque is only an hour away from Santa Fe, but Albuquerque never got good concerts. It was always up in Denver. And so we felt like a connection with Denver being 6 hours away, drive time. But then also like there is such a energy here, like for better and for worse, of just like there's curves that cities go on where like there's a point in time where they're really active and they're fighting and there's a lot of activity going on, and it's legit activity, whether it's creative or political. It's just like, oh yeah, there's a fire burning there in that city. And then, wait too long and you turn into Austin, Texas, where like that fire's now dead, like where'd it go? And so we kind of saw, a few years ago, 4 years ago, like visiting, being like, damn, this city is like, just like rabid about stuff, and we knew that was also going to cause like, it was going to be like walking into a very active, like politically active and a very active like community. But we kind of liked that. We were like, yeah, that's kind of the energy that we hope to have. And we knew a lot of it would be directed at us too, but we're like, yeah, that's probably appropriate. Like, so yeah, just the overall energy of the city is is really special. Yep.
So as someone new business owner, a lot of how I started my business was like learning from other people who've been there, done that, right?
Yeah.
And I can kind of feel like the inklings of a trap there. Like, oh, am I just doing it the same way that everybody else who's in this niche, in this industry does it? It's kind of boring. But like, how do you innovate? How do you practice like
you asking like me personally or recommendations for you?
It could be you personally, or because I'm sure there's some things you learned from that, or
Sure.
it could be like recommendations, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever comes up.
No, I think, well, again, I think I almost highlighted it a little bit during that pivotal slide that a lot of people told me sucked. Um, it's really like, I think in order to create balance between the mundane sort of approaches to whatever industry you might be in, and I think as Vince highlighted too, I think really it comes down to intention. You have to intentionally seek out ways to create that balance. And I think a lot of the times, as both of us highlighted, it's stepping outside your comfort zone. And I think a lot of times people are terrified to go into into experiences that are unknown because you think you're going to walk away with an experience that's not going to be pleasant, and therefore you're not going to be able to extract inspiration for your next project. But for me personally, like some of those moments that have been overwhelming and even tragic, have led to some of the most profound inspirations that have gone into my work and my previous company, and now taking it into my current company. So I would encourage you to really find ways to step out. Vince highlighted nature, and I think that's spot on. Like nature, is absolutely inspiring. But if that's all you're doing every single day, then that's gonna start to shrink a little bit, right? And so I would encourage you to, with intention, find opportunities to step outside your comfort zone.
And with like, mentors or people who might be helping along the way, like who might be giving advice that that it's really important to like seek out advice from as many people as possible when you're first starting a business, even so that you can better understand for yourself what resonates and what doesn't resonate, but staying totally open and realizing, like I gave James a bit of advice on his presentation when he presented it to me a few weeks ago, and it was like, your kind of known world is to be an agitator, to be an instigator, and my advice was like, maybe that part you might want to consider shifting.
You would have been throwing your chairs at me.
And but like you had to step out of your comfort zone in order to like hear the advice and be like, okay, yes, even though that isn't like my natural way of being, I'm gonna like make that shift. But you really have to, you kind of like are a tuning fork at that point where you're like you're gauging all the advice, and you're not taking all the advice, definitely not. You're taking the pieces that are like, okay, that makes sense, that resonates. I'll adjust according to that. Yeah.
Just to piggyback on what your question is, I just started my own business, and the whole thing about anything is to differentiate and to stand out. And when you try to do that, people are like, yeah, okay, that's cute, but then but this is how it's always been done. So not only am I trying to be different, it's just a constant battle of, I'm a nonconformist just by nature, but it's a constant battle of, well, this is how it's always been done. And you've taken the gallery or the museum experience where you stand apart, hands off, looking at something, and turn it on its head, where you go into it.
Yeah.
Surrealistically, and I want to do that with my creative business, but it's like, well, that's a little too different. I'm used to working with agencies this way. It's like, well, that's fine, but it's just this constant battle to stand out and say it's okay if I'm different.
Yeah, try to anchor that in like logic. Like try to dig deep into the why of why you want to be different. Is there a real logical and impactful, profound why behind the way that you want to do things? And can you get to that why in yourself? It can't be, I just want to be different because I want to be different, or get to that why, and then you can communicate with clients or other businesses like, yeah, I understand that you usually do things this way, but the reason I do things this way is because of this why. And if it's logical, then they're going to be like, oh shit, wow, okay, that makes sense, And so for us, it was like, even though we're doing something way different, at the end of the day, we're selling tickets to an attraction. We got it down to a very basic business case that allowed us to be different. it was anchored in something very normal and very logical that then allowed us to then be different from there. If that makes sense.
Totally. And, oh, sorry.
Oh, do you want to have one?
I was just gonna say, like, I can totally feel for you because I think there's such a push on maintaining a sense of difference, particularly when you look at fundraising and things like that, because there's such a I don't know. I think there's an importance to that, but I think Vince hit the nail on the head when he said like the why behind it, and I wonder, is the why directly so I can move into more sales? And if that's the case, are there other avenues? And so, I don't know, maybe I was just feeding off of that a little bit. I don't know if that helped in the slightest bit. If anything, it was an extension of empathy and and some support there. So.
So for creativity, it kind of to me feels like it's a muscle that you can work out, but it's also like a connection with this spiritual unknown. You get inspiration, kind of like tapping into your intuition. So I'm curious, like, what different ways do you exercise your creativity or come up with new ideas? Journaling or meditation or practice, play, all of the above?
For me, extended amount of time with friends in really beautiful natural settings, maybe with some substances involved, that like eliminates that really slows down and eliminates the task-oriented mind, the mind that's trying to think about the next thing that I'm supposed to do. And when I quiet down the task-oriented, like by the second day of hanging out, it's like we are really just in just the soup of it all. That's when I have access to cool ideas, new ways of thinking.
Yeah, and I think for me, so the question was what specifically, it probably sounds so cliche, and maybe even a little egocentric, but like, for me, it's always been just maintaining a sense of open-mindedness to new experiences. It hasn't been one specific thing. I engage in a lot of artistic endeavors, much of what you described, painting, meditations, things like that. But I don't know if there's one thing that's been specific as like a catalyst to leading into like optimizing art. It's more about like operating very innately and intuitively and pursuing things in that moment that I want to. I would say it's more about breaking the mold for me and stepping outside of the expectations of others. And that could be anything. It could be sculpting. It could be painting. I think for me, it's sort of like a process versus specific activities. Did that answer your question in the slightest bit? Okay.
I think road trips are good too. Like driving on the highway or interstate, like by the third or fourth hour, and you're just like on the same road. Like it's again freeing the mind from like, and amazing things come from that.
But not while on those substances.
Not on substances. We'll go back there. Sorry, man. We'll get to you.
So, Vince, you mentioned Terrence McKenna and how eternal return has to do with reaching. So I'm asking both of you what, like, top 3 or 5 thinkers that inspire you.
Yeah, that's great. You mind if I take it?
Go for it.
So for me, Ram Dass, I'm sure if you've referenced the other two, you know Ram Dass. As Vince highlighted, I very much am a rebel, and it's in many instances in my life it's been a problem. And so Timothy Leary I've always been somewhat of an admirer of his. McKenna, of course. I know there's more modern day ones, but in terms of what we're discussed here today, those have been 3 names, and some great literature out there from all of them, really highlighting some of the content that I went over today that you might want to draw on too. And those are a little older, right? Those are we're talking, decades ago.
Yeah, I don't have, Terrence's Food of the Gods and Dennis's work, Terrence and Dennis's work have been really influential. There's, I tend to, it's like, I'm not very, it's weird, I don't read much philosophy, or I don't read much of other thinkers. I should. I just have a hard time reading. But I think about maybe more in the line of like filmmakers and just filmmakers like as kind of thinkers as that have helped shape shape my own thinking. Michel Gondry was incredibly like important to me growing up. Dr. Seuss, Jim Henson. Those are the people that I think about. Miyazaki.
Did you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I was curious kind of about your company. I think you're talking about shampoos and art therapy in a way. I'm doing like a similar thing with a different product,
Yeah.
in a different kind of industry, but just was curious how you're bringing like art therapy into shampoos and.
Yeah. Well, art therapy. I mean, when I think of that, having spent time in that industry, that's like a very specific thing, right? And I wouldn't say we're doing art therapy. So really, much of our branding is about, like as I mentioned, it's about empowerment, right? Our mission collectively is to create products that are really about empowering our customers with the products they need to wake up and to tackle all these consequences, all these topics about what we're talking about today, like going into startups, finding ways to optimize our art, and we live in a world that I think is it's so stereotypical. Like we think of the beauty industry as like, I can't tell you how many middle-aged men I talk to and are like, oh, you're developing haircare products? It's like, absolutely. Like attraction isn't just limited to our appearance. Like anytime you filled out an application, anytime you auditioned for a play or a sports team, like you sought to be attractive, and that took confidence. And so that's really the branding and what we want to bring to the beauty industry to disrupt it. And we have some pretty badass products too. So, so I mean, if you're more interested, get with me and we can, we can connect for sure.
But yeah, you.
Yes, sir. So I'm a little bit on the other side where I'm a traditional artist, thin veteran. Spent a bunch of time developing something that I thought was pretty cool. Happened to be in the thematic entertainment field. Watched you guys since you started, so
Thank you
for beating the path. But it's been super hard for me to try to find mentorship or right, like legitimate answers because I'm a non-traditional business guy, right? I don't really speak that language, but I've gotten a lot of really good advice from people that said, keep going, you have something. What do I do with that?
There's this program called Creative Startups that was really significant for me. It was a startup accelerator that launched in Albuquerque. I think they do Denver creative startups now at this point too. But it's an accelerator for creative businesses, and there's just like a lot of empathy, I guess, and a lot of just like understanding from that perspective. It's it completely transformed my life to do that, because before that I was not a business person at all either. But I think that like the development of a vision is you don't need to be a business person to develop the vision. You just need to you do need to be like a really dedicated and passionate creative to do so, and that the vision, it goes beyond just the creative of the vision. The vision is also, how is this going to work financially, or how much will this cost to create, or what type of roles need to be hired in order to create it. And so I'd say that like there are mentors out there that can help with that process, like through Creative Startups and otherwise. But really, like digging in deeper into your concept and building a fully realized deck that showcases the vision is probably, you could do that probably without mentorship.
I've been working on that.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm at the next step where I'm going for pre-seed, I guess.
Yeah.
But like this industry is so new. Like I don't even know. Like, are you a member of IAPA?
Yeah.
Okay, so like I guessed, right? Like I was like, I think it's an attraction. I think so I went in that, but it's that immersive design.
It's
summit or
very
whatever,
new.
They've only put out like 2 or 3 years of industry type information about it, so it's kind of just guessing like what industry is this.
Reach out to folks who have done it, like Hopscotch in San Antonio, or St. Pete Fairgrounds in St. Petersburg, Florida, Otherworld in Ohio. Like these the people who are most recently have done it also might be, like, I know that, like, when Meow Wolf first launched, a group out of Oklahoma City reached out to me called Factory Obscura, and I was like, yeah, I'd totally love to, like, help you better understand how we got this off the ground. So it might be advantageous to reach out to others who have done it.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. I know you had your hand up.
This question is for both of you, but I think I heard you and start to talk about it in your slides, and that's like AI, art, creativity, humans versus robots, and stuff like that. And so I guess
There's no difference.
I'm wondering specifically how you think that things like AI, generator tools, and other applications of machine learning and AI are going to either hurt or hinder imagination and creativity.
I'm wondering that for VR.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I hope I'm right about this, but I think that the input of the artist is always going to be important. The tools will change, and the tools are going to become like way more capable of delivering on the creative conceit quicker and more robustly. Same is true with Photoshop, or same is true with any sort of digital art program. That the input that the creative is putting into the AI is still going to be critical. But gosh, they might not. I don't know. I mean, I have to believe that, like, as once we're saturated with a bunch of just like kind of boring AI art, that it's going to be really easy to just be like, it's just going to be easy to dismiss it. And that when something comes along, it may even be AI generated, but when something comes along that took like real care and thought by the person inputting or by the person like working on it, it's like, oh no, that's like real effort, that we'll be able to distinguish between the two. That's my hope, at least. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would say, so from my perspective of it, I think, again, it would go back to just being another tool, right? That space, I think, is going to bring, I think, a lot of opportunities that I think artists can capitalize on. But I still think there's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a quick fix, right? I still think there's going to be, and I don't think there ever was a quick fix. Like you said, I don't know what you said, boring, something. Yeah, you can have a boring painting, you can have a really enticing painting. No different than whatever we might develop and experience in like the metaverse. And so, to me, and my outlook on it was just going to be another vehicle, but more of a modern day vehicle for the time and space that we're living in, and that'll probably evolve the next centuries.
I mean, we do have a lot of like square footage in this world that's going to need creative dressing on top of it. Like if we do end up with headsets, which I bet we do at some point, especially mixed reality headsets, like the physical world is going to want to have creativity like all the time. And so having these types of tools allows for like mass creation of creative output. So I'm glad that these tools exist, but yeah, I don't think that the content's going to be very interesting if it's just like self-generated. It's just going to look generic, ultimately. Yeah, totally. Over there.
Curious how you like protect your creative time or that empty space, even if it takes days and days to let your mind like unfold and wander, when with the realities of running a business, and how much like to-do lists and shit you just have to do.
I quit my job as CEO because I couldn't balance that. Like I stepped down because I was like lost every bit of the part of me that started Meow Wolf to begin with. So I actually had to step down from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I mean, I very much practiced what I preached about the transition. The last company I had, obviously a much different industry, right? I was in the healthcare industry, and there will always be a very near and dear space in my heart for that industry. But for me, creatively, this next round through, thus far has been an opportunity to really reconnect with more of an artistic side. And I felt like the space that I was in that industry transitioned, as we all do, just a pivotal moment as humans. And And so for me, I think it's more about those transitional moments and recognizing, again, having that tuition to practice radical self-acceptance and knowing, well, this might not be like the space I want to be in anymore. And I think that's okay. If the company that we're about to launch here in 4 weeks sees some success and we work through that, there might be plenty more either sort of coinciding with it, or there might be others that come after it. And so for me, it's very in the moment. I don't know.
Like taking those transitions as a reset.
A reset, you said?
Yeah, like if you find yourself in a place where you're just like grinding.
Yeah. So
Like,
here's
is
the
that what you did? Basically.
Reset.
Button.
Yep.
here's the thing.
Totally.
And this is gonna probably sound like super like egocentric, but like for example, people always ask me like, it's not like everybody, but certain people will be like, how do you get the inspiration to go to the gym in the morning? And I'm like, I don't get inspired to go to the gym. I enjoy doing that, and so it's something I thoroughly love. And so it's like it takes more discipline for me to go like assemble a chair. Like holy shit, if I had to put a chair together or do something that required me to follow instructions, I'd be out. And so for me, I just spend a lot of time in a space that I love doing, and so that inspiration, the energy, has always been very like on par with it. I don't know.
I think starting some new things this year, one of which is battling disabilities, I'm wondering, kind of like both of your things, where was that time when kind of a spark that allowed you to transition from what your thought process and actually start to go with it? Is there a time? Is there still a time?
A time? Can you say? I could barely hear like that. There was a spark for.
Yeah, so just like a spark to get things started. Like where was the shifting moment when you were like going along the lines of being stuck in whatever you did? Where were you like pushed forward and wanted to get something done?
Yeah. I had a spark when I was living in Portland, Oregon. I lived there for a year when I was 26, and towards the end of it, I was kind of like done with Portland as a place, but I was really inspired by the potential vision I had for Santa Fe, like how Santa Fe could be younger, how Santa Fe could have more interesting art, and because I was kind of surrounded by it in Portland, youth culture was like so prevalent in Portland. And we had none of that in Santa Fe. So I was inspired by this vision of what Santa Fe could be, and I loved it so much. I was like so in love with the vision that I had, and I had no idea how it was going to happen, but I was like just so in love with that idea that I was like, I'm just gonna work from that place of love towards that vision that I have, and I know I'm gonna fail all sorts of ways, and I know it's gonna take a long time, but if I love it, I'm just gonna keep on doing it. And that helped like put me onto a trail that resulted ultimately with Meow Wolf. But I think that like you have to love the thing that you're excited about doing in the future. You have to like absolutely love it, and then know that it's gonna take a lot of twists and turns, and you're gonna fail a lot. But that's okay, because if you love it, it doesn't matter if you fail. It's like you'll learn from it. So.
Yeah, and I would totally second that. I think passion and love is a huge part of it. I think for me, again, my message in some ways is antithetical to Vince, because there's always more of a chip on my shoulder, I think. And so like for me, it was spotting a lot of idiosyncrasies around my current environment, and just honestly thinking I could do better. And then like asking my bosses at the time if I could pursue projects that I wanted to pursue, and just being told no. And it was like, okay, well, that's all I needed to hear. Like, I'm out. And so, but passion, of course, and a love for what I was doing was a big part of that. And confidence. Of course, you have to have confidence going into any of these projects, to any endeavor. Yeah.
My question's probably more for Vincent.
Of course.
You spoke about accidentally creating a virtual installation space and action. Is that something that you took forward? How did you curate that and move further with traction?
Can you, what kind of space? I didn't hear that part.
Fridge,
Oh, yeah, that,
dryer, it's accidental invitation.
yeah, totally. That honestly was like kind of an accident, like it was sort of an accident. Like that design, we weren't intentionally trying to like create this transformational moment by moving people from the known into the unknown. Like it didn't come up, you know, so designed like that. Basically, we were just trying to find something that felt like it was going to be highly desired, because we knew that this project was going to be like a really important project and we had to sell a bunch of tickets. So we were sort of under the pressure of being like, what's something that's going to be like so pop, like is going to be just so pop that, and that's when we thought about secret passageways through the house. Just pulling from like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe and Coraline and like Alice in Wonderland, and just kind of going with that trope, and then but not really doing it consciously, knowing that it was going to be so impactful. And the way that it's carried out in future projects, Omega Mart in Vegas is a grocery store that is like it's a real grocery store, but also a fake grocery store at the same time. It's hard to determine whether it's real or not. And I think that that's a really awesome space to have people in, is like the question, if they can safely be in an environment where they ask themselves the question, is this real? I think it's really a powerful thing to try to invoke. The question, is this real? It's also very dangerous if used. It can be used for manipulation, or it can be used, for wrongdoing. And so it's a very like touchy question to try to raise for folks. But if you do it safely and do it with the right intent, I think it can be really powerful. And then in Denver, we don't really have that same kind of moment. We have a lot of those moments, but it's not really in the same way. It's actually one of the kind of qualms I have about the Denver project, is that you don't have an is this real moment like you do in our other exhibits. Yeah. Did you have a question?
A few of them have been answered.
Okay.
But I guess